Okay, welcome to the breakout room about transportation. As I mentioned, my name is Anna and I am the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers. And before we get into details, we wanted to kind of level set why we're here talking about transportation in the first place. And the reason there is that transportation is now the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Rhode Island. This is true for much of the country. But basically, we've done a pretty good job of cleaning up our electricity sector over the past couple years and decades, although there's definitely still a lot more work that needs to be done there. But the transportation sector has not slowed down. The emissions from that sector have not reduced, and they're a huge threat on the climate change front, but also on the public health front. So transportation accounts for 35% of our greenhouse gases in Rhode Island. And most of that is light duty vehicles. So these are the cars that we're all getting in every day to get wherever we need to go. And reducing those emissions, a huge part of that has to be increasing walking and biking and shared mobility and just reducing the number of miles that we all drive generally. But once we've done all that, we still have a lot of gas-powered cars on the road. So how are we going to clean those up? We're going to have to switch to electric vehicles. This is a graph that we have on our website that we refer to quite frequently. The data comes from the Union of Concerned Scientists, and it shows you the relative emissions of a gas-powered car, a plug-in hybrid, and a battery electric vehicle. But importantly, it shows you those emissions plugged into the New England electric grid, because the emissions associated with an electric car depend on how the electricity that's filling its battery was generated. So it's important to use as local data as we can find, and that's what this UCS data shows us. So the average gas-powered car emits 381 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. The average plug-in hybrid, which is a vehicle that has a battery that you can charge by plugging it into a wall outlet, but then also has a backup gas tank, emits about 176 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven. So that's about a 50% reduction. And then a pure battery electric vehicle that doesn't have a backup gas tank, it's just a battery on wheels, has less than 100 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile driven, and that is a 75% reduction. So if you remember how much of a chunk transportation is from our greenhouse gas emissions, if we can all reduce our emissions 75% by switching from a gas-powered car to an electric vehicle, that'll go a long ways in making that slice of the pie a lot shorter. One thing I should mention is thanks to work at the state level and also through green municipal aggregation, the emissions of those battery electric vehicles are just going to decrease over time as we add more and more renewables and zero emission sources to the grid. But those gas powered cars are not going to get a whole lot cleaner at this point. And then one shameless plug, if you drive an electric vehicle and you choose 100% local renewable energy through our program, then you can drive on zero emissions at all. So how is Rhode Island doing on this transition to electric vehicles? Not terribly well. Rhode Island is definitely lagging behind all the other New England states when it comes to EV adoption. What this graph is showing you is the EV sales rate per 1,000 residents of the New England states from 2013 until now. And Rhode Island is the green bar, and you can see that every year it is the shortest or second shortest bar, which means that we've got the lowest or second lowest rate of EV adoption among the New England states. And this is largely due to the fact that there aren't as many supporting policies in place to help drive that market transformation. And this is one of the big reasons why we run our Drive Green program. So with that, I will pass it over to Devin to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Devin Delibro, and I am the program coordinator on the Drive Green program. So I'm just going to talk about what the program is overall briefly, and then tell you how we're doing, especially in COVID-related times. So bear with me for folks who have heard my spiel a few times. So the Drive Green program started in 2016 as a way to both educate folks about electric vehicles and also provide a place for people to then go buy those cars once they're educated. So if you take a chance to look at our website, we have all sorts of information on there, from different incentives to winter driving to charging, what have you. And the idea is once you're done, you then go on our website to sign up for a pre-negotiated deal through one of our dealers to get a discount. And that's basically it for the program side of things. It's an oversimplification, but we've sold over 800 cars through the program so far, and we're really, really pleased with it. We were thrown a huge curveball with COVID, and I think that we have pivoted really nicely. So a few things that we've done since COVID started are the Drive Green community group. And this is a Facebook group that started in actually last summer. And so far we have 163 members, which is really great because this is a place for people who have EVs and who don't have EVs to come together and share information and experiences and really answer some questions. So we even have some newbies on there who are first time owners and are really pleased to actually have a place to go and talk about it and have their questions answered. So I'm very pleased with that. And if you want, you are very much invited. So come join us. Next, we have my next car will be electric pledge, because we realize that not everybody is ready to make this kind of purchase and decision like every day. So to keep us in mind and to keep EVs in mind, we have that pledge, and we'll send you emails every so often just to keep you updated on EVs. And so far within a year, we've got 235 pledges, so we definitely count that as a win. Similarly, we have our newsletter for folks who want to keep in the know about EVs. So that's a quarterly thing. We send you everything from like the best deals on the Drive Green website to new car models that are coming out and just kind of any EV news that you could think to want. And then we have been kicking butt with webinars since COVID started. So since July 2020, we have had 20 webinars, and we've really upped our game as far as the different topics we do. And we've had a lot of people join, way more than we normally would. So we're really impressed with those too. We even just started a new Women in EVs webinar series that I would invite all of you to come and join as well. But that is it, and I will switch back to either Mal or Anna.
Thanks, Devin. As she mentioned, the Drive Green program can be really effective to help drivers in Rhode Island make the switch to an electric car in the absence of strong state policy. But we know that state policy can really be a strong lever in order to increase EV adoption, and specifically to address two major barriers that a lot of people face if they're thinking about making the transition to an electric car. The first being the upfront cost of the vehicle, and the second being the availability of charging infrastructure. So Green Energy Consumers has been really active in the last year to advocate for policies and help us and help Rhode Island invest in EV enabling infrastructure and policies. One of our largest legislative priorities is a program called the Transportation and Climate Initiative, or TCI. It is a regional effort to cap emissions from the transportation sector. The graph that Anna showed at the very beginning is really illustrative, but one thing it doesn't show is that transportation emissions tend to grow every year because more people are driving more miles. And so putting a cap on emissions for that sector will be really important to make sure that we can meet our climate goals for 2030 and beyond. But the Transportation and Climate Initiative program is really special because it not only puts a cap on those emissions, but it also raises revenue so that the state can invest in alternatives to gasoline-powered vehicles. I want to take a moment to recognize Representative Terry Courtbrand, who is in the room with us today. She has been a major champion of this bill and has introduced it in the House in Rhode Island. The bill is really great. It's required for Rhode Island to participate in the regional program, and it establishes a really good framework for how to spend the money, what clean transportation investments might look like, and how Rhode Island can use the program to propel itself to a modern, equitable, and clean transportation future. So the program would raise about $20 million annually to invest in things like electric vehicles, transit, and related infrastructure, as well as infrastructure for walking and biking. And so these are all really important investments to make sure that every Rhode Islander can make the transportation choice that is right and most affordable for them.
And for some folks, that can mean an electric vehicle. But for other folks, especially in dense urban areas, walking, biking, and transit can be just as good. So the program is really flexible in that way, and we hope to see a diverse portfolio of investment. Connecticut and Massachusetts are also very likely to move forward with this program. And so it's a great step that Rhode Island can take in conjunction with our neighbors, and one that can improve our climate, improve our health, improve our economy, and improve the options that Rhode Islanders have to get around our uniquely small state. So it's a great opportunity. And in a minute, I will drop something into the chat because the TCI enabling legislation is moving forward in the Senate. There is a hearing scheduled tomorrow in the Senate Environment Committee, where this will be kind of a first shot to hear what different stakeholders have to say about the program. And for the folks on this call, you can be a stakeholder. If you're interested in getting an electric vehicle and want to have a say in the kind of clean transportation future Rhode Island will have, I encourage you to follow the link I just posted, and you can help green energy consumers advocate for this program and many others to make sure that we can meet our climate goals. And with that, I think we can open things up to questions if people have them.
I have a question.
Yeah, I would love to get to that question. I do see one in the chat from Sasha that's asking, are there any other realistic avenues to increase EV and charging subsidies? Yeah, so that's a great question. I think the crux of being able to fund clean energy programs is figuring out where the money comes from. Green energy consumers certainly supports more progressive ways to raise revenue. And I think there are some that are being proposed this year in the General Assembly. But generally, we think that TCI is important because it creates a fund specifically for clean transportation, as opposed to some other funding mechanisms that create, put money into the general fund that can be used for all sorts of things. So TCI is unique in the sense that it's a sustainable source of revenue. So we'll have it for the next 10 years. And it can only be used for things that advance this clean transportation future that we want to see. But certainly, I mean, if the General Assembly had an opportunity to fund it, I'm sure we would support that as well. We just haven't seen that.
The other thing to note on that front, I'll jump in real quick, is that there are hopefully, knock on wood, cross your fingers, whatever your favorite is, federal dollars coming to help us rebuild our economy, but with a particular focus on infrastructure. So the details of that are all TBD. It really depends on what comes to us out of Washington. But one thing to think about, and that's what we're doing and other advocates are doing, is how to prepare the state to take advantage of those and basically have plans ready to go to make sure that we can capture the full value of those dollars. So that's one piece of this that is something we'll be keeping an eye on. And then the other piece of this is that the electric utilities have a role to play in this future. So we've been paying close attention to National Grid's plans in Rhode Island and continue to advocate for those to be more accessible to more people, more aggressive, more ambitious. So that's another piece of this that we could talk about, whether that is make-ready funds to help bring down the costs of actually installing charging stations, or time of use rates that make it cheaper for folks to charge up their EVs and makes better use of the resources that we have on the grid to balance out supply and demand. Those are all pieces of this puzzle. So TCI is definitely one tool in the toolbox, but there are many, many other tools in the toolbox that we all need to be working on at the same time.
What about the fact that Pennsylvania Power and Light is buying the national grid operation in Rhode Island?
Exactly. Great question. That is, I don't think we have an official opinion on that yet. The process, as far as I understood, has not really started. Mal, if I'm missing something, correct me, but I think this is we'll watch closely, and this will mean important things, but we just don't know exactly what the impact will be just yet.
Anna, can we just go, Linda, I think you had a question before. I want to make sure you had a chance to actually ask it, sorry.
Yes, what I wanted to ask, because I am thinking about buying a new car. I don't know if I can go to, I'm thinking of a hybrid. I'm just not, still a little hesitant about the electric car, but I was looking at Consumer Report, and they have a new way to rank the cars also as far as the emissions of the car, the actual, like I don't know if you're familiar with, they give a green leaf for some cars that they say the emissions of the car, the engine is made cleaner, do you know what I'm talking about? Or like it's the exhaust of the things, that comes out of the engine is cleaner than other cars. They burn cleaner, I guess. Have you heard of that? Or
I think Mel has an answer.
Yeah. So there's a couple things going on there. I don't know specifically about the tool that you're referencing from Consumer Reports, but green energy consumers trust Consumer Reports for lots of our information about EVs. Most recently, they released a report about how electric cars are cheaper to maintain and own compared to their gas-powered similarly sized cars. And so they're a great resource to get information on different kinds of vehicles.
Okay.
In terms of like comparing different electric models to each other to find the best, like the greenest car, I would just say that a fully electric vehicle has no tailpipe emissions whatsoever. All of the emissions from that car come from whatever the energy mix is that's used to charge it.
Yeah.
And so I don't know of any great tool that compares the different vehicles except for just looking at their efficiency.
Sorry to interrupt. The Union, oops, sorry, there's an echo. The Union of Concerned Scientists EV emissions tool that we use to make that graph, they've recently updated it so you can choose a specific car model and plug that in. So if you're considering a couple different cars, if they are electric, you can choose that, and it'll show you what the emissions would be when you plug it into the New England grid.
this was actually ranking the hybrid cars, not electric cars. So I don't know as far as their emissions.
So
as far as their actual emission.
Yeah, one thing that you might see for gas-powered cars that are hybrids without a plug is Subaru does this and it annoys the heck out of me. It says partial zero emissions vehicle on some of their cars, which
Really?
what is partial zero? That is a nonsensical term,
Yeah.
but it essentially is some, fancy way that they put together their engine that makes it slightly better in terms of the kinds of emissions that harm human health. It's still a gas-powered vehicle. They still have lots of pollutants that degrade air quality and exacerbate things like asthma. And so that can tend to be a little on the iffy side in terms of how much better it really is for the environment. So just be cautious that it can be more of a marketing term than anything else for combustion engine vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat, and then Joshua, I see that you have your hand raised, and we'll get to you as soon as we can. So Mel, actually, I think this would probably be more of a you question. So James, if you want to verbalize your question out loud, that would be great, and we'll try to tackle it.
If not, that's okay too. I will say, Mal,
Can you hear me?
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, please.
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce a policy that tends to, a monocultural policy tends to neglect a broad variety of communities that are not going to be engaged in buying or using EVs. And I think it's a broader emphasis on public transportation. Public transit is a major focus of a more equitable transitional approach. Although, getting more EVs on the road and EV infrastructure is a necessary condition, it's not sufficient. Majority of folks who are reliant on public transportation, low-wage workers, youth, elderly, are not going to be serviced by that kind of a structure. Even more important is the built environment, which, whether it's an EV or a fossil fuel or a hydrogen-run vehicle, if we continue to focus on private personal vehicles for everyone, I think, create an environment. We have done. We've created an environment with emphasizes the whole structure of relationships and conditions of employment, shopping, moving, that increases a lot of emissions indirectly. We build more parking garages. We have more, we have more parking spaces. There's a really good article in today's Providence Journal, a guest editorial by the urban green guy, who said basically we've located our urban green cooperative where there are 5 different bus lines that service it, and we deliberately downplayed the parking lot so that I think that's an approach that needs a lot more attention and more respect, so to speak.
James, I so agree with you, and that is 100% what Green Energy Consumers is behind. We like to replace the gas-powered cars that are going to be bought anyway with electric vehicles, but you're absolutely right that they are not the only solution. And particularly for folks that struggle to afford any car, being able to create a variety of options so that they can choose, to feel safe riding their bicycle to work, or to take a high frequency RIPTA line to be able to get where they need to go. That is all part of the solution. And Green Energy Consumers has our most experience with the electric vehicle piece, because that is a major component of our Drive Green program. But I bet Anna could talk a little bit more about our effort to electrify buses in both Rhode Island and Massachusetts as well.
I can speak a lot more about what we've been doing in Massachusetts, but I do, Mal, if you want to talk about buses in RIPTA, I can pass it back to you. But I do want to highlight that this is one of the reasons why we are supporting TCI, because the built environment issues that you just mentioned, James, are decades in the making, and they're going to take a lot of funding to address. And we have, as a country, have been underfunding public transit for a very long time in favor of this gas-powered car world that we've built. So turning that ship is going to take a lot of investment, and that's why TCI is one of our priorities, because it'll have that dedicated stream of funding that we can use to start moving towards the world that we want to be building. So Mal, did you want to speak to any RIPTA specific stuff, or should we move over to Josh, who has his hand raised?
Just that Green Energy Consumers has an eye on what RIPTA is doing in terms of electrification. It happens to be the one tiny victory that Rhode Island has over Massachusetts, because RIPTA has embraced the electric buses much more quickly than the MBTA. But we're going to continue to follow that and make sure that their promise to deliver on, I think it's 15 all electric buses that are going to be on the roads soon actually comes to fruition. And so we'll be monitoring that and make sure to give updates as they come. I do see Joshua has his hand raised.
Could I just add to that? This is Alice Horahan, and just point out the fact that RIPTA is using the Volkswagen funding to buy electric buses. So they are actively trying to, buy more electric vehicles.
Yep, and there's I think a procurement of about 15 buses being supported by the federal low-no emissions grant for specifically to replace diesel buses with cleaner alternatives. So there are going to be more soon. I happen to live in the Elmwood neighborhood of Providence and can occasionally see the electric bus coming down Elmwood Avenue. And it's a great sight, and I hope it's the first of many.
Hi, this is Josh. That's great. It's great news to hear about RIPTA and the changes that are being made. I'm kind of in agreement with the last comment that hybrid cars and electric vehicles, right? It appeals to a certain demographic and is affordable to a certain demographic, and it makes more sense to invest in public infrastructure. So on a policy level, is either TCI or Green Energy involved in implementing like electric school buses for communities, right? That can affect all communities across the state. And I think another area of opportunity, this is, unique to the community I live in, right? We're looking at purchasing new police vehicles, right? Whether it's municipal, schools, or police vehicles, these are kind of perfectly suited for electric use. A lot of idling, they sit overnight and can charge. I don't know if there's any effort there to work with local school committees or town councils to push for electrification of municipal fleets.
So yes, I'll start and then Devin or Malik jump in. One thing I think would be helpful to mention is the way that as an organization we think about doing our work. We are an alliance of consumers, so our programs interact with consumers and the decisions that they make in their daily lives, which is why our Drive Green program is focused on vehicles. But then the experience that we gain and the information that we learn in running those programs with consumers informs our advocacy work, which we do at the state and local level. So that is kind of, each piece feeds into the other. So when we talk about public infrastructure and more equitable forms of transportation and all of this, that's usually in the advocacy side of things, but it is informed by what we learn in the program side of things. So on school buses, what I can say is that, and Mal, correct me if I'm wrong, because I might get some of these details wrong. National Grid has a thing called power sector transformation, where a couple of years ago, basically, they laid out a plan for lots of things that they were going to do to help transform the electric grid. And in particular on transportation, there were a couple of buckets. On the infrastructure side, they have a program called Make Ready, where basically for certain applications, they will cover the cost of upgrading the infrastructure up to the point where the customer installs the charging unit. And in certain situations in environmental justice communities, they'll actually cover the whole thing, not just the infrastructure part. That part of their program was broken into several buckets. So they were going to install charging at workplaces, at multi-unit dwellings, and then there was a little extra bucket to help electrify public transportation and school buses. They did really well in workplace charging. They were totally oversubscribed. They have a waiting list. Multi-unit dwellings, so condos and apartments, pretty well, a little bit more challenging. They had a really, really hard time with electric school buses. They were coming to school committees and saying, look, we'll do the infrastructure side. You just need to get the buses, but we'll support you on the infrastructure side. And school committees and towns and cities just weren't there yet. And a big part of that is that upfront cost of a new electric school bus is still pretty prohibitive. And so this is where we're really excited for federal dollars coming down the pipeline. If those federal dollars can take care of the cost premium basically of the buses while we wait for battery prices to come down so that the buses are less expensive, then we can pair those federal dollars with whatever we get from TCI with support from the utilities to really move this all forward. But basically, so far, we need to pull in a couple more parts to really make that happen in a big way.
That's great, thank you. And there's a comment there from Terry saying that most school districts don't own their buses, right? They engage in leases or some other partnership with a company, right? So how do you incentivize that company? And back to your point, it's creating the demand. So maybe summarize something that's all free and send out, and Rhode Island as a state, and say, we want electric buses, here's the demand, and then some private enterprise gets the support to supply that. You don't need to answer that, it's kind of just a thought or an idea, and appreciate the time. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, that's good because we have to shift to Liberty. Liberty, would you like to unmute? I think you had two different questions that you had to.
The first thing was, I think we need to address the problem of the time it takes to charge as far as electric vehicles, and how many places there are where they can do that if they're on the road. So that's one thing that I think needs to be addressed. But the other is, as some of you may be aware, my husband is a very prolific inventor, and he has something called teleport transit, which is a form of above ground transit. Really ideal for getting in and out and around in cities, in downtowns especially.
Thank you for that comment. I'm afraid I might get the hook in just a moment because we're going to be brought back to the breakout or the main room in just a second. But to answer your first question, this is a big part of why charging at homes is going to be so important. The majority of electric vehicle drivers right now charge at home, where their cars are parked for hours and hours and hours, most of the day on any given day. And so, as Anna mentioned, the efforts to install charging near apartment buildings and condos and places where people are parked for lots of time is going to be especially crucial to address the length of charging. It's kind of like how you might charge a smartphone. You don't realize, you plug in at night, overnight when you're sleeping, and then the next morning it's fully charged and ready to go. That's how I like to think about it, at least. And so, yeah, related to your other comments, thank you for making those. I tend to defer to the Rhode Island Transit Master Plan that really gets at, how we can improve transit affordably.